In a close-knit town, a single act of prejudice at a local diner ignites a series of unexpected events. The longtime owner makes a grave mistake when he refuses to serve a respected veteran. As the veteran exits, hurt by the discrimination, the owner believes the matter is closed. However, he couldn't be more mistaken. His actions have caught the eye of someone ready to confront the town's deep-rooted biases. What follows will astonish everyone and impart a vital lesson on forgiveness and transformation. Before we delve into this remarkable tale, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from today. And if you enjoy this story, remember to subscribe. David Turner sighed heavily as he climbed out of his trusty old truck, feeling the creaks of his aging joints, a reminder of his years serving the country. The warm, southern sun cast down on his weathered face as he looked up at the faded sign of Molly's Diner. A small smile played at his lips. He had frequented this diner for years, enticed by its promise of good food and friendly faces. Pushing open the door, the familiar jingle of bells announced his arrival. The enticing aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, making his stomach rumble in anticipation. As he shuffled toward his usual seat at the counter, he nodded politely to the other patrons. But something felt amiss today. The usual chatter was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. David sensed eyes on him, scrutinizing his every move, but he brushed it off as the paranoia of an old soldier. Settling onto a stool, David noticed Molly, the diner's owner, emerge from the kitchen. Her face, typically welcoming, was now marred by an unfriendly scowl. Her cold gaze bore into David, causing him to shift uncomfortably in his seat. "What can I get for you today, David?" Molly's voice was gruff, lacking its usual warmth. Choosing to overlook her change in demeanor, David replied kindly, "Just the usual, Molly. A cup of coffee and a slice of that famous apple pie of yours." Molly's jaw tightened, her knuckles white as she gripped the counter. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, David. We're out of pie today." David's brow furrowed in confusion. He spotted a freshly baked apple pie just a few feet away. "But Molly, I can see. I said we're out." Molly's voice rose sharply, startling several patrons. "In fact, we're closing early today. You'll have to leave." A heavy silence enveloped the diner as David sat frozen, trying to comprehend the situation. In all his years of visiting Molly's Diner, he had never been treated like this. The other customers shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes while others watched the scene unfold with shock and curiosity. Slowly, David stood up, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "Molly, I don't understand. Have I offended you?" Molly's face twisted into an ugly sneer as she coldly dismissed him. "You've done plenty just by walking in here. I don't serve your kind in my diner. Now get out before I call the authorities." The words hit David like a physical blow, leaving him stunned and hurt. For a moment, he was transported back to his youth, when such treatment was all too familiar. But this was different. This was Molly, a woman he had considered a friend for years. As David shuffled toward the door, shoulders slumped in defeat, a young woman at a nearby table stood up. "This isn't right," she said, her voice trembling. "You can't treat him like this." Molly spun around, her face flushed with anger. "This is my diner, and I'll run it how I see fit. If you don't like it, you can leave too." The woman hesitated, caught between her desire to stand up for what was right and her fear of confrontation. In the end, she sat back down, shame filling her eyes as she watched David exit the diner. As the door swung shut behind him, the diner erupted into whispers. Some patrons hurriedly paid their bills and left, unwilling to support such blatant discrimination, while others remained, either agreeing with Molly or too shocked to act. Little did Molly know that her prejudiced actions would spark a series of events that would shake the very foundations of their small town. If she had only understood who David Turner truly was and the powerful connections he held, she might have reconsidered her words. Instead, Molly Harris had just made a monumental mistake, and the consequences would soon crash down on her like a tidal wave. As David made his way back to his truck, his mind spun from the encounter. The warm sunlight that had once comforted him now felt mocking, highlighting the stark reality of the prejudice he had faced. Climbing into his vehicle, he gripped the steering wheel, hands shaking. For a long moment he stared blankly ahead, waves of hurt and humiliation washing over him, threatening to drown him in despair. But then, almost imperceptibly, a change occurred in his demeanor. His jaw tightened in determination, and a fire ignited in his eyes. David Turner was many things: a veteran, a father, a respected member of the community. But he was not a man to tolerate injustice. As he started the engine, his mind began to formulate a plan. He may have been kicked out of Molly's diner, but this was far from over. Little did Molly know that her actions would trigger a chain of events that would transform their sleepy little town. Meanwhile, back at the diner, Molly was feeling the immediate repercussions of her actions. Several regular customers had left, some shooting her disapproving glares as they walked out. Yet Molly stood firm, her face set in a stubborn scowl. She believed she had done what her father would have wanted, what she thought was right. So why did a gnawing sense of unease linger in the pit of her stomach? As the day dragged on, word of what had happened at Molly's diner spread through the town like wildfire. People gathered in small groups on street corners discussing the incident, and the atmosphere was charged with tension. In front yards and on street corners, voices hushed as residents discussed the shocking incident involving David Turner. A well-known figure in the community, many couldn't believe that Molly, who had always seemed friendly, could harbor such deep-seated prejudice. Among those affected was one person who felt an unparalleled rage upon hearing the news: Michael Turner, David's son. Michael was in his Washington, D.C. office when he received a call from a family friend back home. As he listened to the account of what had happened to his father, his grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. Michael was not just any concerned son. He was a powerful U.S. Senator known for his advocacy for civil rights and veterans' issues. He had tirelessly fought for a more just and equal society, and now his own father had been subjected to such blatant discrimination. The irony stung, fueling his determination to right this wrong. As he ended the call, Michael leaned back in his chair, mind racing. He could leverage his position to bring the full force of the law down on Molly Harris. He could make an example of her and demonstrate that such behavior would not be tolerated. However, he also understood that such actions often deepened divides and bred resentment. No, this situation called for a different approach. Leaning forward, he picked up his phone again, ready to make some calls and call in favors. Molly Harris had no idea what was coming her way, but Michael was determined to teach her a lesson she would never forget. As the sun began to set over the small southern town, casting long shadows across the streets, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the community to its core. The actions of one prejudiced woman were about to collide head-on with the resolve of a son fighting for his father's dignity. When the dust settled, nothing would ever be the same again. What happened next would astonish everyone in town and impart a powerful lesson about the consequences of prejudice. But before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of justice and redemption. The next morning dawned bright and clear, yet an air of tension crackled like electricity. News of David Turner's treatment at Molly's diner had spread rapidly, and the town buzzed with speculation about what would happen next. Tom Harris arrived at his diner early, as he always did, to start preparations for the day. However, as he approached the front door, he noticed a small group of people gathered outside, holding signs that read, "No to Racism" and "Equality for All." Tom's face flushed with anger as he pushed past them, unlocking the door with trembling hands. Inside, Tom tried to carry on with his usual routine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. He jumped at every jingle of the bell above the door, half expecting to see David Turner or the police walk in. As the morning dragged on without incident, Molly began to relax. Maybe this would all blow over, she thought. However, her relief was short-lived. Just as the lunch rush began, the bell above the door jingled again, and Molly's heart nearly stopped. Standing in the doorway was a man she didn't recognize, but there was something about him that commanded attention. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with an authority that made Molly instantly wary. The stranger made his way to the counter, his eyes scanning the diner before settling on Molly. "Are you Molly Harris?" he asked, his voice calm but with an underlying edge of steel. Molly nodded, struggling to find her voice. The stranger's eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "I'm Michael Turner," he said, and Molly felt a chill run down her spine. "David Turner's son. We need to talk about what happened here yesterday." Molly's mind raced. She had heard whispers that David had a son involved in politics, but she had dismissed them as small-town gossip. Now, confronted with the reality, a flicker of fear ignited within her, but her pride and deeply ingrained prejudices quickly stifled it. "Listen," she said, her voice gruff. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is my diner. I have the right to refuse service to anyone I choose." Michael's expression remained neutral, but a dangerous glint sparkled in his eyes. "Is that so?" he said softly. "And on what grounds did you refuse service to my father, a decorated veteran who has lived in this town longer than you've been alive?" Molly's face flushed red. "I don't owe you an explanation," she spat. "Your father and people like him aren't welcome here. End of story." A hush fell over the diner, and other patrons watched the exchange with a mix of horror and fascination. Michael stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on Molly. When he spoke again, his voice was low and controlled, but filled with quiet fury that made Molly take an involuntary step back. "Ms. Harris, I had hoped we could have a rational discussion about this, but it's clear that won't be possible. Let me be very clear. What you did yesterday was not just morally reprehensible. It was illegal. I intend to use every resource at my disposal to ensure you face the consequences of your actions." Molly's bravado faltered. "What do you mean? You can't do anything to me. This is my business." Michael smiled, but it was a cold expression that held no warmth. "Oh, Ms. Harris, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm not just David Turner's son. I'm a United States Senator, and I've dedicated my career to fighting against exactly the kind of bigotry you displayed yesterday." The color drained from Molly's face as the weight of his words sank in. She had kicked out the father of a U.S. Senator, a man capable of making her life very difficult. "This isn't over," Michael said, turning to leave. "You'll be hearing from me again very soon." As the door closed behind him, the diner erupted into whispers. Molly stood frozen behind the counter, the realization of what she had done and who she had angered finally settling in.